Anderson has gone crazy. This is not good enough. It's a roast to the crew's ass. Just because we had a big crab harvest. Cage snow crab Brossard. They're fatter and bigger than ever. You can get 7 or 8 grand for one of these. I'm gonna have to fly right where I am. The footage came to the Wizard in Dutch Harbor. Keith just finished unloading. Now talk to his brother about where to go crabbing. Keith thinks we should go west of St. Paul. The younger brother thought it would be better to go east, but it cost twice as much to get east. And we're not sure about crabs. While they talked, the crew packed up their gear. The two men decided to play a game to determine the winner. The first round ended with his brother winning, 46 miles northwest of the typhoon. It's like a wild horse out here. The old white hair to worry about the white. The crew worked hard though. The old white said there is a cold current from the Arctic, making the already bad weather worse. Because his snow crab quota was the first to be submitted. So the port issued golden king crabs. Now Old White is located on the border of Russia and Alaska. A 250-mile wide blast of cold air, coming right at them. But here are the high and low sea cliffs. It's a favorite setting for golden king crabs. White's gonna put 40 crab pots around here. Old White said the crab is 3 times bigger than the snow crab. It's also 3 times more expensive per pound than snow crab. Where Old White threw the crab pot. It's also an almost vertical cliff. The storm grows stronger as the crab pot sinks into the sea. The big waves came in one wave after another. On deck, Clark railed against the waves for not being chivalrous. Sneak up on him a 30-something. Despite the wind, the waves are not small at all. Just drop by and you'll be straight up with the crab pot into the sea. Tired of being disturbed, Old White turned to the west. He's going to drop it in the position shown here. This is where he usually catches trout, so I'm not sure if there are crabs here. But we can't help it. After all, the waves out there are really big. 76 miles northwest aboard the Titan. The crew on deck cast the anchor hook. Anderson says this year has been the worst. After all, the weather in previous years is bad. There is no such typhoon every day. The crab pot doesn't look so good on board. Yeah, it doesn't even work on a sorting machine. Even crew member Cheyenne said the harvest was worse than a screw. There's still a lot from yesterday's harvest. It suddenly dropped off today for some reason. Anderson had his frustration written all over his face. The second cage is still very few. The thought of 150 cages in here. Anderson got a headache. He just wants to get out of his cage and get out of here. The crew cast the anchor hook. Then Anderson sensed something was wrong with the engine. Tell the crew to check the engine. Anderson's probably pretty pissed off. The crew were then told to return to their cabins. The maintenance man looked for a long time and could see nothing wrong. Anderson had a feeling this was going to be a serious accident. The next 2 maintenance workers looked left and right. At the same time, Anderson got a call from his wife. Tell Anderson that his best friend Tom died of a heart attack at 10 o'clock this evening. Anderson did not recover from the news for a long time. First thing I do is call Cheyenne. I haven't seen much in the past. I don't know who Cheyenne is. Let's just say Cheyenne is Tom's sister. You can point out what's wrong. Cheyenne came up to hear the news of her brother's death. He came to Anderson's side, looking incredulous. Anderson saw Cheyenne and couldn't help but reminisce. When I started my own business, the legendary that Tom helped him rebuild. In the process of getting along with Tom, Anderson learned a lot. Tom is a good mentor to Anderson, who helped Anderson the most. I haven't paid you back. He died in a confused way. Anderson was silent for a long time after the call. I got a call from a repairman after I made some fun of it. Maintenance told me there was nothing wrong with the power system. It just stopped because there wasn't enough hydraulic fluid. They've now added hydraulic fluid. The water still runs fast after grief. The storm never abated, as if everything were normal. But the person in my heart will never come back. Anderson says he hates January because his father disappeared on January 6th, 2010. Wayne died of illness on February 13th, 2009. And now my best friend died in January. And not many crabs were caught in January. Anderson says he's lost. 83 miles southeast of the Wizard. The weather here is much better than over there. The Wizard is halfway to St. Paul. To St. Paul? Roston talked to Keith because I lost the last 2 games. So this is about making your own decisions while Keith is sleeping. A single trip costs more than $10,000 in fuel. Keith will die if he doesn't catch the crab. As the wind speeds up, unknown dangers are coming. It's a good thing Rose isn't presbyopia yet. Tell the crew to tie the chain immediately. The crew were told to set out at once. Keith, who had just woken up, also came to inquire. Rose told him exactly what had happened, but Keith's focus is all on the map. These map coordinates are getting worse the more they look. I can't hide it anymore, so I have to tell the truth. Meanwhile, the crew rushed to the scene. Keith up there has to direct the crew first. You'll have to deal with your little brother later. The crew under command worked in good order. Keith is always reminding the crew to be safe. Soon the cage was set up. The accident was caused by a careless rookie. There were only 5 chains that were supposed to be 10, but I'm glad I caught it before it happened. And Keith is glad he has won. A good, motivated group of people. Keith did not scold his brother after the accident. Just kidding to let my brother take the loss. Well, they got on pretty good terms anyway. 30 miles northeast of the northwest. The weather is just as bad here. The weather predicted by the media came one after another. This Bering Sea is really too much to stay. Laobai said they had to hurry to meet the quota. The sooner we can get back, the sooner we can get back. The crew below head out to get ready for work. White's regretting it now. I didn't arrange the crab pot as planned. There are a couple of big turns in the crab pot now. The wind and waves on the deck roared. The workers are still hard at work. Take up gear running. Old White was worried about the safety of the crew. The crab pot was soon raised to the deck. Turns out there's not even a crab hair. Old White alone in the wind messy. In the storm, the crew cast an anchor again. Old White cheeks like a girl. Thousands of waves hit tirelessly. The crew is not willing to interfere. In the second cage, there's no chicken feathers. I'm sorry, there's still too little karami. The crew then cast the anchor again. Old White says the terrain changes fast here. 200 meters to the east is a cliff, and here is sand. The third pot of crabs comes out. The cage is finally not empty. There's a dozen more on the sorting machine. I feel better about the old man's face. Then a wave of spray poured onto the deck. Northwest L4 remains positive, but the waves don't stop with the harvest. Mr. Bai said it was really hard to catch crabs in the weather. After the storm, the fifth cage also boarded the deck. No sooner had the crab pot been opened than the accident happened. The lift that hasn't been maintained for a long time is in a temper. The sudden situation took everyone by surprise. Old White busy asked everyone had been injured. Fortunately, no one was hit by the half-ton. If you hit it, you can cut it in half. Clark, who was closest to the crab pot, congratulated himself. The crew then operated a crane to remove the crab pot. But there are a lot of crabs in this cage. Old White said back to hit the crab pot to sell scrap iron and buy 10 non-smashing crab pots. Let the crab pot show you how to do it. It wasn't long before all the cages were out. The crew relaunched the crab pots. 48 miles southeast of the Titan. Anderson is teaching Cheyenne about sailing. There's no less wind here on Titan than there is on Old White. Then they discussed the ceremony in Tom's memory. When we're done, Cheyenne will go down and tell you. Then he told me about the past. Bala bala. Then Anderson dressed and went on deck. Tell the crew Tom is 1st Airborne of the 81st Division and a guide to his own sailing career. Then Cheyenne tied the American flag to the crab pot, talking about my past with Tommy. Anderson picked up a rose and planted it. That's about it. After the morning is over, the memory of the sustenance is thrown down. Tom gave Anderson the fishing line tied to the cage. Tom gave it to Anderson for his first harvest. Pray that Tom in heaven sees this. 120 miles northwest of the witch. Keith is so mad at his own brother, making fun of him for putting things away. Keith was in the same mood as the storm outside, and that without Ross in his own life. I don't even come back for a ride east of Sao Paulo. But he's his own brother. You don't want to be mad at your brother. Don't worry, you'll soon be overwhelmed. The inky sky and the furious sea melted into one, trying to devour the only light on the sea. After venting, Keith went to the break room. The crew must pay attention to safety when working and make fun of his own little brother. There was a burst of joy. Then the crew went to the ice deck. Can we talk about how to clean the ice? Then the crew went about their work. Keith lamented how rare the storm was, even though I've only seen the old captain 2 or 3 times. After cleaning up, several people worked together to put the crab pot. Then pry open the crab pot and hang the bait, and then into this deep ocean. Keith's view of the captain's cabin is covered in snow. You can't even see when the next wave is coming. But we still need to keep our spirits up. Try to make sure the crew doesn't get hurt. Suddenly a big wave came and took the crab pot straight down. Fortunately, the crew quickly dropped the rope. I can't save you if you get tangled up in this thing. Keith is still traumatized by what just happened. Just as the crew was about to say something, another big wave hit the crew and they were blindfolded. Keith says he shouldn't have listened to his brother. Now put the whole ship in danger. But now they have no choice. I'm just gonna have to push on. Ross is a bit of a child, shall we say. The crew is still de-icing the ice. I don't think there's a safe place in the Bering Sea. It's a near-death experience to get on this boat. But this season, at least no serious injuries. 118 miles southeast of the Titan. The waves here are no better than Keith's. Anderson said it was a normal wave. I must have gone surfing, but I think we should stop the crab fishing for now. The waves on the deck were like a flood. All Anderson could do was hold the rudder. The rest is up to the crew to overcome. Soon the Titan reached the first marker. Anderson wanted Tom to wish him luck. The first thing to salvage was Tom's cage. With the take-up gear running, Cheyenne thought Tom would bring a good harvest. The crab pot is pulled up onto the deck. Tom really gave them a great gift. Anderson was so excited, he couldn't close his mouth. After counting, 78 animals were confirmed. The crew can't wait to throw the second spear. Take-up gear running. The second cage was another bumper harvest. Anderson was so happy about that. The crew dumped the crabs on the sorting machine. And then you count, and guess what? 78 again. What? Does that mean something special? And then the third was a grand slam. This cage really looks like a waterfall. I've never seen Anderson this excited. It feels like a month's less gout for this cage. Anderson up there finally lives in Bungbu. Grab a flamethrower and run down and light it. It's a burn to the crew's ass. Anderson is as happy as a 38-year-old baby. Anderson remembered it again after the party. When Tom left the crab boat. When he said goodbye to everyone. I can't believe Sophia's here. Anderson said everyone was happy for him. He remembered Tom's smile when he left. But things have changed in just a few years. 116 miles northwest of the Witch. The winds here are up to 40 miles an hour. The blowing water was like a thick fog. Keith could barely tell if there were waves in front of him. The crew cast an anchor hook from the deck. Keith prayed to the crab god for a good harvest. The crew performed a crab dance for good luck. Pulled the crab pot out with the take-up. But the harvest wasn't so good, you know? There are only a few crab pups here and there. A wave of embarrassment Rose felt. The crew cast the second hook. What difference does it make when you pull it up? The same goes for the third cage. Keith had mixed feelings. And then the fourth cage is the same. I don't think Keith can hold it any longer. $30,000 for a little of this stuff. Then the sixth cage went on deck. The cages that followed were full of this bird. Keith couldn't hold it in this time, starting to complain about your brother's choice of a good place. An argument ensued. At first, we were just sitting there. The back stood right in front of him and started spraying. The argument lasted almost 2 minutes. Keith was overwhelmed by the fury of his good brother. He just fell to the ground. Ross rushed over and asked how Keith was doing. Then the episode ends. Do you want to know what happened next? Captain Keith has been mad at his brother ever since. It's not like it used to be. Be replaced by. Keep your eyes on the lookout when you talk to people. Go to the bathroom and dry your head. Take a blood pressure check and you'll see for yourself. The pain of sleeping at night rolled all over the bed. Still not going back for treatment. Insist on catching the full crab quota. Determined to live and die with the crew. I say we stop cursing the crew. Here we go. End of last episode. After Captain Keith suddenly fell to the ground, Ross hurried up to ask Keith what was wrong. I called Keith several times, but there was no answer. Ross shout, experienced crew on board. Keith heard his brother on the radio. I suddenly got a few convulsions and thought of myself. It wasn't long before the crew was dressed and ready to board. Keith could talk now too. Nothing else. First give Ross a lecture. Ross just turned around to talk back. I found Keith sitting on the side. Ross saw the crew coming up. I rushed over to stabilize Keith. What's going on? After asking questions, go to the medical kit and look for medicine. Keith is clearly not doing well. Ross just found the right medicine. In a hurry, Keith called Ross over. Then Keith whispered to Ross. Roughly mean, Keith had no feeling on the left side of his body. Specifically, you can't feel your left arm. Ross thought it was a joke at first, but Keith's eyes turned red as he talked. Ross didn't say much about giving Keith the pills. After taking the pills, Keith said he felt a little better, but he certainly doesn't look better. Ross then informed the crew of the general situation. The crew felt like the sky had collapsed. Ross said she first gave her brother aspirin. Look at the medical manual. Looks like a heart attack. I took another nitroglycerin tablet. The scariest thing is not the unknown disease. They're in the middle of the ocean. It'll take you at least 8 hours to get back. He was worried about his brother's ability to hold up. After the work on deck, Taylor described the situation to everyone. Inside, the captain, Keith held on to rest. Ross followed up and asked Keith how he was feeling. He said he was fine, but his body gave him away. This left Ross scratching his head in worry. I had to call a doctor friend. Describe the symptoms to your friend. About the pills Keith was taking. Keith was in bed in pain. Ross told a friend he was going to Sao Paulo port. Asked him if he can reach a hospital somewhere. A friend said Danjean could put him in touch. Asked what time to book an ambulance for him. Rose looked at the map. It was 68 nautical miles from the port. Have him book an ambulance for 7 o'clock. Then the friend said to help him contact the doctor on duty. Call him back after a while. After the call, Rose said, brothers. The condition could be a stroke caused by a heart attack. The camera-holding photographer agrees. But there is still too little. Ross will have to deal with a stroke. Then to the lounge. Asked Keith how he was feeling. Keith said that except for a little cramp in his left arm, the rest of my body feels fine. Ross looked at Keith, who couldn't even move. I'm about to have 3 words written all over my face. Keith rolled over to prove it. Ross said to hold out his right hand when he was better. Keith reached over with his left hand without even thinking. I can't tell my right hand from my left hand. Ross is asking questions when he's in this state. On the way out, Keith said not to send himself back. I want to catch all the quotas. Dare to send yourself back. Ross is never coming back to his ship again. When he got back, Ross contacted the Coast Guard. Because it was the Coast Guard by radio. So the call was picked up by a nearby White. Old White also frowned at Rose's description. And Anderson was nearby. Anderson eavesdropping and turning up the volume. Ross gave the Coast Guard the coordinates first. And gave me the details about Keith. Request permission from the Coast Guard to enter the port at night. The more Anderson heard on the other side, the more wrong he was. How is this so similar to a stroke? Old White also heard this frown. Truth be told, White is worried about Keith right now. After all, stroke is not a minor ailment. Something less intellectual disability and something more paraplegic. I hope Keith heard about this one. Back to the Wizard. The friend called after asking the doctor. Ask Keith about the nitroglycerin. Things are looking up. Ross replied that things are much better now. My friend says that's not a good sign. If a stroke is caused by a heart attack, it has a high mortality rate and can induce hemiplegia, just like what happened to your brother. Ross froze for a moment when he heard this. I didn't hear Rose speak for half a day. The friend said to find another expert to ask. It doesn't have to be that bad. Time came to an hour. Rose was worried as he watched the surging waves. After all, to go to Sao Paulo in this weather is to die. I was worried when my friend called. She called in a colleague of hers who specializes in ER. The doctor introduced himself briefly. Depending on the circumstances, it could be a minor stroke. Then have Ross take Keith's heart rate. Keith surprised the photographer when he came up. Then I looked at Keith and saw that there was a blood stain on his head. Ross asked Keith what was going on. Keith had the look of a child making a mistake. The doctor then asked Keith if he had chest pain. Keith was pretty sure not. After asking the question, the doctor made a judgment. He said if Keith wasn't lying. What we have here is a minor stroke. It won't be life-threatening anytime soon. Ross was relieved to hear that. Keith on the side said, look, I said it was fine. Now get back. I'm going crabbing. Ross had frustration written all over his face. Taylor in the lounge announces the return flight. The doctor told Rose to try to get back in 24 hours. Make sure Keith drinks plenty of water on the way. Take more vitamins and don't eat staple foods. The hospital's going to run a lot of tests when he gets back, and we can't let him go to sea after this treatment. After hanging up, if this pushes Keith a little harder, I'm going to have another stroke. Then Keith said he wouldn't sell The Witcher. Are we going to grow mushrooms on the Wizard? Ross wants to go to hell with Keith. Had to push him back to rest. The break room photographer and Daymare are talking. The photographer asked Daymare what he thought. Daymare says no one on the ship has any medical skills. Nobody knows what to do in this situation. Plus, Keith was clearly off his game when he was talking. There's only one thing that happens to Keith if we don't go back. Keith is still trying to persuade Ross to go back to crabbing. Ross says going back is out of the question. Going back would kill my brother. I'll feel guilty for the rest of my life. Keith stopped talking when he heard this. The scene turns to OJ here. OJ said Keith was like a father to him. He really wanted Keith to be safe. I don't know if OJ is the one. Back to the captain's cabin. Keith confessed that he had lied to Ross. He got the blood on his head in the bathroom. Ross was surprised and asked how did he get it. Keith said he went to the bathroom and went numb, fell straight to the ground. Rose took advantage of the situation and advised him to come to the port for treatment. Keith said after a long silence, I can't leave without you. You'll all be drinking Northwest when I'm gone. Ross says he doesn't want to take any chances. You have to make the right decision. I just kept saying I didn't want to go. Ross kept telling him to go. Basically, Keith didn't want to leave the team behind. I don't want to go out in a wheelchair. No place to be angry, Ross. I took aim at Randy the camera boy. Ross just finished swearing at Randy. Keith told Randy to keep shooting. Don't worry about your stupid brother. I can't comment on that. Ross had no choice but to contact the Coast Guard. The picture came to the Titan. Ross said Keith had a confirmed stroke. But Anderson has no culture and can only buy occasional karma. We're back on the Northwest. Old White is more educated. He told us straight from 14 years ago. Captain Phil of the Legend suffered a stroke in port. That's because he didn't save her in time. Captain Phil died just 11 days after treatment. Turn around and look at Keith again. Just like Captain Phil back in the day. Plot back on track. The Coast Guard asked what time we can get to the port. Ross said around 10 p.m. Old White felt that Rose should go to Sao Paulo first. Then we fly to Holland for treatment. It's actually not safe. After all, there's snow all over the ground. No one can guarantee the plane will land properly, said Anderson on the other side. The port of Sao Paulo is hell when the wind blows from the northwest. It's 2019. Anderson tried to pull in at the northwest wind. The boat almost capsized. In say 19, Bill wants to stop at St. Paul, the which was 25 miles from St. Paul. The crew went to the lounge to talk to Keith. Keith kept saying he was cold. He asked the crew to turn up the heat for him. The crew filled Rose in when they were done. Then Rose described it to the doctor. The doctor asked Ross to take Keith's blood pressure and see if Keith has any skin abnormalities. Then Rose went off in a hurry. I just got in the room and I haven't said a word. Keith wanted to sit up, but I couldn't get up after several attempts. Well, that's not an option. Just lay down and measure. Keith started talking nonsense as soon as he put the blood pressure machine on. Probably when I was young. I thought Keith had seen the lights. They didn't stay after they took their blood pressure. Went up and talked to the doctor. Except for being a little cold and talking nonsense. Nothing else out of the ordinary. Blood pressure is about 150 to 200. The doctor decided it was transient cerebral ischemia. There's no immediate danger. Just get back in time. Time comes tonight. The Wizard is 3 miles from St. Paul. Ross gave Old White a call because he knows the port of Sao Paulo best. The phone disconnected. The Old White is to greet the three. Ross just said Keith was having a heart attack. Then he said he was in Sao Paulo. We need White to get them a map. You know, the guy's still lying to himself. Say my brother and I both had heart attacks. But Keith's condition is not consistent with a heart attack. Rose had to tell Old White the truth. Then Old White sent the map. The yellow area on the map is Sao Paulo. This is the entrance, because one side of the entrance is long and the other is short. All the waves will come in through the short mouth, and that causes the waves to get really big. And since the port is small, large ships cannot be unloaded by fast steering. That's why so many boats almost capsized here. Ross then alerted the Coast Guard to arrive. The Coast Guard advised Ross not to wait. Ross said it was impossible to wait, unless this wave knocks me over. Arriving at the port of entry, remembered the past. Turn and return to the Wizard. Keith lay on the boat and couldn't sit still. Ross got the notice. The plane will arrive in 3 hours. Rose wanted to wait another 2 hours. Don't enter the harbor until the waves are low. But the doctor did tell him to hurry up. Patients can't wait that long. Ross told the doctor he'd be there as soon as he could. Call the Coast Guard when you hang up. I'll try to enter the port in 10 minutes. The Coast Guard was impressed when they heard that. After the call, thinking about Keith still in bed. Let's just do the math. The crew were then alerted to the deck. The crew were told to put on their gear immediately. See, the crew is all here. Ross alerted the Coast Guard to the arrival of the Wizard. The white guy on the other side who heard the news. I have to admire Rose's courage. The picture comes to the Wizard. The crew said St. Paul was always a victim of. The west wind is notorious for the great waves. Ross pulled off the gas without hesitation. The Wizard staggered off to St. Paul Harbor. The waves of the sea continued to eat away at the Wizard, trying to drag the Wizard into a bottomless pit. Watching the roaring waves, Rose couldn't help but be afraid. Suddenly the waves strike. Thank God the crew were lucky. As soon as we entered the harbor, we were struck by the waves. Ross never stopped swearing. On second thought, we might as well just go for it. Then pull the throttle straight to maximum. After 2 or 3 waves, straight into the harbor. Once inside the harbor, the sea is much tamer. They also officially arrived in Sao Paulo. The ambulance arrived at the port at random, and so Keith was taken to the ambulance. The episode also ends hastily after the ambulance leaves. All right, that's the end of the season. Anyone who wants to work on a crab boat, this is the latest recruitment video for this year. I saw the guy gently pull with the hook. $5,000 poured into his arms, and it's very safe to work here. The casualty ratio has remained at 0. Food, shelter, and a hefty death insurance policy. For example, someone came to experience it today. Just a kiss on the head from a rocking crab pot. He was literally paralyzed by the dry. You don't report the captain, you're fired. So leaders are not only good at solving problems, and good at dealing with people who ask questions. Keith on the other side was accompanied by paramedics. At the best hospital in the village, the doctor was examining Keith. Keith seems to be in a better state of mind. 800 miles from Anglake, the Wizard. The crew were very worried about the captain's health. OJ prayed to God to keep Keith safe. Roger shared his concerns with the photographer. The mood was sad, and Ross called the boys to collect the cage. Ross said Keith's vitals are stable, but the cause of the stroke is still unknown. After a brief explanation of Keith's situation, says they're still 20,000 pounds short of their quota. If we don't get this trip, we're going to lose it. The crew cast the anchor hook. The take-up machine began to exert force. Rose prayed for a good harvest this time. The crab pot is slowly pulled out of the water. Pull it up, and you'll see it's numb. The crew cast the anchor hook again. Pull it up, and it looks the same. Just 2 minutes later, there was a phone call. White is here to ask about Keith. Ross told me everything about Keith. Then White said if you can't catch crabs, I can give you coordinates on some crabs. Ross heard the stingy White say that. At first I thought White was lying to him. Then the old White said he was not joking. After all, we've been friends for decades. I can't let him lose his money. Ross thought about Keith, who was seriously ill. I looked at the empty crab pot again. Tearfully write down the coordinates given by the old White. White's a nice guy who still thinks about Keith. Hang up the phone, and the last cage is out. 88 miles southeast of a lady. Jacob is brushing his teeth. Vasily was teasing Jacob. Said he was gross brushing his teeth in the kitchen. Bala bala, a bunch of all kinds of insults to Jacob. After brushing his teeth, Jacob sat down to do his hair. The camera turns and Jacob is sitting next to Vasily. Turns out this kid's been making fun of Jacob's face. Let's just say Jacob is still too good-natured. The picture came to Rick. He said the weather had been really bad recently. As a result, the crabbing schedule is often disrupted. More than 300 crab pots were released in a week. Not even 20% of the quota. Take-up machine on deck turns. The crab pot is pulled up and there are very few crabs in it. The photographer gave the crab a close-up. Jacob throws the anchor hook again. Crab pot on board just like before. Rick's got a big head when he sees it again, said Jacob, the crab sorter. My friendship with Vasily is gone. Vasily gave Jacob another middle finger. Rick's head ached to see the crew so harmonious. Then Rick said there weren't many crabs around, so then go to the area shown in the picture. The message was immediately sent to bring the cage back. They're moving. They're moving. Jacob said he was trying to maintain the relationship. Try not to cause any further conflict with Vasily, at least until the end of the fishing season. The crab pot was slowly lowered into the sea. The float got wrapped around the crew's neck, but Jacob was quick on his feet. Or the lucky viewer will see God first. Rick quickly asked if he was hurt. The crew said they needed emotional damages. Jacob said it would be good to lose nothing this time, and you want emotional distress. Rick said he didn't expect the accident. He wasn't even expecting this to happen. The crew are still joking and talking. This time it wasn't for Jacob's quick reaction. This crew is long gone to see God. Looks like we're going to need a security meeting sometime. With the crab pot into the sea. To the Titan, 33 miles northeast. Anderson held another meeting for the crew. Cheyenne is so good looking. The meeting focused on 3 points. Safe, safe, and fucking safe. Everything else is fine as long as you're safe. Koo said there were 8 days left before the quota submission date. He's got about $280,000 left. This time on the ocean floor, 66 feet deep. 40 cages were dropped. I hope there will be a good harvest this time. The crew cast the spear rope. Anderson says crabbing in a new area is exciting. But when you don't catch a crab, the excitement turns to rage. Crab pot on deck is a good harvest. The crabs in the sorting machine are full of vitality. Anderson clapped excitedly. The excited crew threw another hook. The winding machine turns and pulls up a big cage. When everyone is still silent in the joy of harvest. One of the crew members operating the crane was careless. Kino groaned on the floor in pain. Anderson ran down, locked the photographer in on the way out. Anderson trotted aside to ask questions. Kino says he can't feel his lower body. Get the crew to help Kino up when they hear that. Take the Kino and head for the lounge. Anderson also swore at the photographer. They carefully turned Kino over. The crew asked again how Chino was feeling. Kino said he could feel his legs, but I can't move it on my own. I think I have a brain injury. The photographer suggested fixing Kino's head first. Anderson then pulled out a neck brace. Cut Chino's clothes open. Put a neck brace on Kino. He hurried to the captain's cabin. Contact the Coast Guard to apply for reentry status. The Coast Guard routinely asks for basic information. And then Anderson told the whole story. But the next cameraman said something. The angry Anderson caught him and gave him a good scolding. I wanted to remind Anderson that he wasn't telling the whole story. It's killing me to be scolded for no reason. After hanging up, Anderson realized he was overreacting. By this time, Kino was unconscious in the lounge. The situation threw all the crew into fear. 98 miles north on the Wizard. They have reached the position given by Old By. The crew is preparing for the drop. Then the crab pot with everyone looking forward to the sea. Ross, who is in command, receives a call from Keith. Keith says his condition has stabilized. Then he asked Rose if he had caught any crabs. As soon as Ross mentioned White, Keith was very emotional and said, "Don't you dare ask White for an address. This old den is not a good thing. I can't tell you how many times I screwed us. How dare you believe the address he gave you?" Ross said, "You know what I am at crabbing. If I don't try it this time, I can't even get half of it out by delivery time." Then he hung up the phone very strongly. On deck, the crew are hauling crab pots. Rose thought his brother was crazy. I was afraid he'd end up in the hospital. And not only does he not want to treat it properly, still trying to figure out how to catch crabs. I feel like Keith has nothing but family on his mind. The crab has no place at all. 104 miles southwest of the Lady. Jacob cast the anchor hook. This is the cage that will make or break the Lady, because the cage is positioned 180 feet below the surface. If there are no more crabs in this cage, then Rick has to get out of these waters. Spend a few days looking for a new place. Gradually tighten with the take-up machine. Because Vasily, these 2 days, it's like eating an old 8-burger. You can piss on anyone you catch. So Rick just wants everyone to stop fighting. The first pot of crabs came aboard without surprise. It's a sight to see on the sorting machine. The second cage is no surprise there is a good harvest. When Jacob took the hook, one missed his grip and hit Vasily, who's already pissed off about Jacob. Up here is my mother third company. To hear this guy swear, so dirty, and Jacob couldn't stand it. Also came the wave of loving father care 5. Rick was thrown straight into a state of emergency. 2 people scold while working methodically, and then he just kept yelling and never did anything. It ended with Vasily leaving. He went straight to Rick after he left. The complaint was a smear campaign against Jacob. I don't even mention how dirty I swear. After Vasily left, Rick said he wished he hadn't locked the door. The door must be locked and no one allowed in. The view comes to the deck. Jacob was making fun of Vasily with Knit. Told him to duck as soon as the hook came off his hands. I apologized profusely after I hit him, but this guy's not letting it go. The crew went back to work when things calmed down. Rick said he just wanted to unload his cargo. They don't have to fight each other. The last one on board was not so good. Back to the lounge, Vasily did not stop. Said Jacob was acting like a contact list. He has zero tolerance for such people. It's not about race, color, or gender. Well, that's pretty fanciful. 90 miles southeast of the Titan. Anderson made a call to Mike. Gave him a full account of Kino's injuries. Mike asked if Chino was experiencing any memory loss, etc. Anderson says he even knows what he smokes. I asked Kino if he could move his arms and legs. Anderson said he would go down and have a look. Then Anderson was in the lounge. The crew is taking Kino's blood pressure. Anderson asked if Kino could move his hand, and then Kino made a move. Blood pressure is a little high, according to the crew. Anderson asked Kino if there was anything out of the ordinary. Finally, he told Chino he'd be at the port by now. Then he went back to the boat. Anderson says we have to get back as soon as possible, even if it takes more than that. I had to go to the hospital and check it out. Anderson can rest assured. It's a nice perk, free of charge, and accompanied by a leader. The view goes to the Wizard 114 miles north. The crew cast the anchor hook. Ross said White offered him a place, but it doesn't say that the crab is in that structure, so he had to shove it all down the deep end. He trusted old White not to lie to himself, because White isn't trying to help himself. It was to help my brother and the witch. The rope gets tighter and tighter as we talk. The crab pot is also lifted to the surface. Crab pot boarding boat, old White sure enough did not cheat him. These crabs are big and plump. It's perfectly fine, and you can buy one for $100. The second cage got the same result. Into the sorting machine, like a little waterfall. The third cage is also full. The 3 cages add up to more than 200 animals. If this keeps going on, the quota will be completed in 4 days. The 3 test cages worked well. The next step is mass release. The footage came to Angle Lake, Alaska. Keith's test results are back. The good news is the stroke didn't affect his body. But the bad news is he was diagnosed with an acute heart attack. Keith was relieved to hear that too. He'll then be referred to a cardiac specialist. They can leave the hospital after they get a health certificate. Keith said after the doctor had left. As soon as I got out of the hospital, I had to get back to the ship. Good guys all about crabbing. 730 miles southwest of the Lady. They're still a mile from the new crabbing ground. Rick says it's going to be good luck this time. In the lounge, Jacob and Vasily quarreled again. He said Jacob leaks half his ass every time he gets up. Just wanted someone to give him a whack. I can't afford to smear Jacob like that. So he stood on the stairs and cursed at him. For Rick up there, he was speechless. Rick just talked the two of them out of it. Vasily said Jacob sexually harassed him. Rick asked him to explain the situation. He just said that Jacob always got out of the shower. He swings the Skovox around naked, and then he left without looking back. A dumbstruck Rick asked if the photographer had seen him. Then Jacob will be called up. Rick said if you still want to be captain, please put an end to bad habits. Jacob said the guy used to yell, and at me. Then Rick asked you why you were walking naked. Jacob said he used to call me monkey, and he used to yell, and at me. And then I'll get the blitzer out. Said he looked like this thing. I can only say that it is too abstract. Rick said what Jacob did was stupid. Then have the crew assemble. But Vasily did not come up. Nick gave Rick a rundown. It's not that different from what Jacob said. While down below, Vasily was packing up. Don't get me wrong when you say you don't discriminate. Back to the captain's cabin. Nit also said Vasily laughed at him. It's a stupid Mexican. Discriminate against both. Well, that really hit Rick in the head. Rick went straight to Vasily. We're not even catching crabs, so we can send him back. The picture comes to the Titan. They have returned to port. Anderson gets dressed and gets the chips. Get in the car and take Kino to the hospital. Back to the Lady. They also arrived at the port. Vasily had packed his bags. Rick got in the car and drove him back. On the way back, Rick also told him not to discriminate. But this kid won't listen. Whatever Rick says, he says it. I got so mad at Rick that I threw him off. No wonder your wife deserved to divorce you. Pictures came to the hospital. Keith is ready to leave the hospital. All I can say is that it's you. End of this video. Do you want to know what happened next?